Thank you for joining us for this presentation on literacy skills and emergency preparedness for students with deafblindness. We are really excited to have Jen here to speak about the importance of literacy and also about the importance of emergency preparedness and mitigation strategies. We will offer some suggestions for weaving the two together at the end. Please note that the strategies Jen presents are aligned with Richmond School District number 38, are Richmond's emergency guidelines. It is always important that you refer to your school district or your school's emergency guidelines before you start anything. Your educational authorities guidelines may be different than Richmond's. And I just realized we need to record this. Megan, can you start recording?
Yep, I'm recording.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so a little bit about Jen. This is Jen McEachen. Jen is a former PopDB student who resides in Prince George. She is working towards a bachelor's degree in emergency and security management through the Justice Institute of British Columbia. She is currently employed as a diversity, inclusion, and belonging coordinator for the Canadian Red Cross, a deafblind ambassador for CNIB Deafblind Community Services, and is the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Director for the Canadian Risk and Hazard Network. So I'm going to start with the second line acknowledgement first, and then I'll pass it to Jen for hers. So the Provincial Outreach Program for Students with Deafblindness acknowledges and thanks First Peoples of the Hunkaminam language group on whose traditional and unceded territories we teach, learn, and live. Jen?
And I acknowledge the land I live, work, and play. Prince George is situated on the unceded traditional territory of Claylay Tene First Nation, which is part of the Delkel Carrier People's Territory. And I acknowledge PopDB's territory as well.
Thank you. And just before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. First, we're going to ask that everyone keeps their cameras off and their microphones muted. Auto captioning is available, so click the button that says captions below. We have ASL interpretation here, and I believe they're spotlighted. This session is being recorded. Please put your questions in the chat box. Megan from PopDB will keep track of them and ask Jen at the end. So with this, I'm going to turn this over to Jen, and let's get going.
Thank you very much, and I am looking forward to sharing my passion for literacy and emergency preparedness to our participants this morning. So I'm just going to briefly provide an overview of what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to just share my literacy journey, both free, print, braille, and computer literacy, because all three are so essential when you get out to the real world after you transition from high school to post-secondary or employment. I will discuss briefly about the 4 pillars of emergency management and the hazard risk assessment, which can be useful for the later grades to complete for science and social studies projects, and also Richmond emergency procedures, fire and earthquake drills, and give you guidance on how to teach a student with deafblindness and those with complex needs to navigate those drills as well. And like Alana mentioned, I am using Richmond's emergency procedures guide and to use your district for your own guides. There's going to be a lot of idiosyncrasies in the guide that might be very similar, and a lot of the information is common sense. And lastly, Alana will provide some inclusive lesson planning suggestions that's integrated from the information that I'll share with you today. Next slide, please. So my education and employment journey, I did have intervener services from grade 3 onward, and that's going back to 1991. And that's when the PopDB consultants also came into the picture, and they were phenomenal in providing the support that my parents and teachers needed to help me learn and grow as a person with a deaf blindness. Once I left high school, I did proceed to college, and because I didn't finish high school, I was able to pursue that through college alongside my applied distance technology certificate, which is basically office admin and computer related programming. Pardon me. I'm going to take a sip of tea periodically. Okay. Thank you. And there's a gap after I graduated from college where I pursued my associate's degree in emergency management. However, in between that time frame, after I completed college, I attempted to pursue employment. And despite the challenges of even getting my foot in the door for an interview, I ended up finding volunteer work in order for that stepping stone into employment. And it ended up being an excellent thing I did. I've been with the Canadian Red Cross since 2009 as a volunteer before I got hired as staff in 2016. In that time frame, that's where I got the bug. I dived into doing some emergency, well, back then it was called disaster management, and I learned that I could do this role for the future, and that's when I went back to school later on. In that same time frame, I became a professional pet sitter, house sitting. I did that for approximately 15 years between my volunteer and employment period. But 2 years ago, because of the pandemic, a lot of the small businesses got hit. So and it didn't affect me because I was employed already. So I was able to transition and close my pet sitting business and start the consulting business, which is what I do now. It's the best decision I've ever made. And as far as the bachelor's degree, it's what I'm working on right now, so I can continue to study and learn all the gaps that are needed with people with disabilities surrounding emergencies and disasters. So, knocking on wood, if things go well in my future, I may lead into a master's degree. It depends, because I'm halfway through my program right now. Next slide, please. As far as my literacy journey, most of you will not be familiar with congenital rubella syndrome. I call myself a rare bird when it comes to that, but it's coming back with all the issues around vaccines. So there's going to be an uptick of more potentially of individuals who are deafblind that's been affected by congenital rubella syndrome. As a child, I was a high partial with some moderate severe hearing loss. I was fitted with contact lenses first, which my mother had the joy of crawling on her hands and knees to find them whenever they popped out. But then I transitioned into wearing glasses, plus wearing hearing aids by the time I was 1 year old. And in within my family, my parents integrated total communication. So I learned sign language, ASL. I learned to speak, and I learned to hear. So I did everything in order to understand my environment and use it to my benefit for literacy as well. Now, as an adult, my vision and hearing has decreased, and a huge jump occurred in high school when I developed glaucoma. Okay. So print literacy, I started in kindergarten, and my family are bookworms. So I was a sponge for books. So this was not an issue for me. I love to read. Even to this day, I still do. And Braille came on later on in high school when I started to have the deteriorating eyesight. And that became critically important to this day. And altogether, computer literacy became essential. I started very early, actually on a toy computer in kindergarten, but I really was immersed into computer literacy when I was taught keyboarding in grade 3. That's the most driest subject ever. But my teachers found ways to motivate me. In grade 5, they purchased Mariel Teaches Typing. Within a year, I was typing 100 words per minute.
Sorry,
And,
Jen, for the interpreter, your parents purchased to motivate you. You said your parents purchased something.
Okay, the school district purchased a laptop during when I in grade 5. Okay, I hope that's clear now.
Thank you.
Thank you for interrupting. And then Braille in grade 9, I taught myself. I was recovering from back surgery. What was I supposed to do? So I taught myself Braille in that 3 months I was at home. And the following year, I got all of my textbooks in Braille, except for math. And to this day, I use it for my schoolwork, I use it for my work, and even travel to locate the elevator buttons and all that. So Braille literacy is highly essential for when you're outside transitioning from high school to college or employment. Next slide, please. Now we go into my favorite subject, emergency management. So just for anybody who's blind and visually impaired that is in the group, there is a graphic on this slide, and it's a circle, and the arrows go clockwise, and mitigation is highlighted in yellow, preparation highlighted in green, response in red, and recovery in orange. In this presentation, I'm going to be emphasizing on the first two, which is preparedness and mitigation. So preparedness is time when you build your Go kit with your students, practice those drills, and making sure the emergency plans are up to date, which is typically done on an annual basis. So that's the preparation side of the thing. And mitigation is the hazard risk assessment. And that's where you can combine it with a social studies and science unit with your students. And with this, I will give us an example, which is in the next slide, what it could look like for a high school student doing the assessment, okay? So next slide, please. So this is the sample assessment, and this comes from one of my classes last year for Introduction to Risk Management. And I use Toronto, the area near where the Canadian Helen Keller Center is located, and was able to scale down Toronto's hazard risk assessment to a simple 3 columns and 10-something rows, because the other one, it was convoluted, complicated, and it just wasn't very people-friendly. So I listed, this one I thought it would be a great idea to use traffic lights. So, because now it's easy enough for a student to understand red, yellow, and green. So red being super high, yellow being high, there is potentially a risk, and low risk, but there is something there. So because Toronto had a high risk of power outages from tornadoes and severe winter and weather storms. And way down in the bottom is the natural gas leaks. There is a risk. It's low, but it's there. So this is just a scale to help people understand how to use this. Alternatively, you can move this to a tactile or large print object view map for your students. They can feel what areas the hazards are. For example, one area might have a high flood risk, and you can indicate it with the colors that I've shown here or tactile markers. And wildfire suits. Those are the two main examples that come to my mind right now. Next slide, please. O&M and literacy. I love combining these two together. There's so many ways you can do this, especially with emergency management. And from my own personal experience, I wasn't taught any emergency preparedness when I had O&M over 20 years ago. So now I can look at it and provide that information to individuals, especially to O&M instructors, how they can teach students for emergency preparedness. So I suggest a whole team approach, collaborating all together. The O&M, teacher for students with visual impairment, teacher for the deaf and hard of hearing, interveners, parents, and your consultants. Okay, parents are very critical. They know the child and what limitation that may be needed to be addressed before pursuing the lesson plan. And I actually participated in my IEP meeting. So if your student is able to, depending if it's age appropriate, ask them what they can help with. Because they're the ones that's going to be learning this. So, for example, they can start building the maps themselves. They need to learn their cardinal directions and stuff like that. Primary and alternate emergency exits. This becomes a critical issue because most students are in the classroom most of the day. But there are going to be times when they're going to be at the gym or the library. You need to practice from those secondary locations where the emergency exit, especially if the student's in high school with multiple levels, multiple locations they're at. So you got to learn multiple different ways. And this is really good time to use your critical thinking skills and problem solving skills for the student. And learning to read those maps, either object cues or tactile or whatever mode the student uses. Practice using stairs. Most people don't realize, and even in my building where I live, I have to remind people that when the power is out, elevator's not going to work. So practicing on stairs and making sure the child is confident in using those stairs will help when it comes to drill time. Locating the rescue location. This is more critical for individuals who use a wheelchair and a walker. With Richmond, they suggest in the stairwell at the top, and 2 people to be at that child's side until the principal is notified. And like I mentioned, practicing from not just my primary classroom, but every other parts of the school. Here's something that I would never taught. Where are the fire alarm pull stations or fire extinguishers? If the teacher in the science lab says, has a little fire, I need fire extinguisher, can somebody go get it? Maybe the student will be able to know where it is and help and grab the fire extinguisher and bring it back to the teacher. So that's something that is something that needs to be considered in the plan. And how often are you going to practice this? Who, with, and how? So this is it's very important to keep that all in mind. Next slide, please. So fire drills. So one of the things that Master of Disaster, which is part of emergency and climate readiness, which used to be known as Emergency Management, BC, British Columbia, they have a kit, called a student guide and a teacher guide. And Alana's going to have it in the resource list that you guys will be provided after the presentation. But what I love, when they sent it to me, they actually have very bright, high contrast flashcards that you can actually color in, add braille labels, add it to the object cues, for your student. So I thought it was great. It comes with items that you don't put in your Go Kit, but that's because it comes with the game that you lay out for your students. See if I can lay it out right. Yeah. It comes out with the mat. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it very well, but it's kind of a game thing, and you lay it. What's nice, it's plastic laminate, so you can reuse it several times, and it comes with suggested lesson plans in the teacher kit as well. So that's always important to have before you start your drill, because you never know if you're staying or going, and it's just something that the student needs to learn. During the drill, use the student's preferred mobility method, like a guide, cane, wheelchair, or walker, and use that for every single drill you practice. And this is really essential that I recommend, because the intervener and student's not always going to be near the student. The student should buddy up with a friend or another classmate, and that classmate should learn alongside the student to do the drills as well. It's just an alternative way so that they can get to the muster location safely, like the rest of everybody that needs to get out of the building. Okay. Once the student gets to the muster location, find a way for the student to independently and confidently let the teacher know they're there when they do the roll call at the muster location or meeting location. A lot of people aren't familiar with muster, so you can just change it to meeting location if preferred. And like I mentioned, with elementary students, most of them are on the first floor, but I know some places have 2 floors. So practicing it multiple times so that students is comfortable doing it. And high school is always the first block if the student's not in a class, like if it's lunchtime, they would go where they meet with the first block's muster location. And just with FYI, this is Richmond's policy, so it's going to be a little different for other school districts how they do this. For complex student needs with wheelchairs and walkers, the stairwell is where you're required to go, and there's usually 2 people that need to be there. And if there is evacuation required, then the principal will notify the incident commander, and that will then be relayed to fire dispatch, so they know that there's an individual who needs to be assistance getting out. Okay. Next slide, please. Earthquakes. So we all are, well, folks that live in Vancouver, but there are other places around the province that should be practicing it. Even myself, although I live in Prince George, we do get earthquakes. We feel it. I felt them. And it's always a good idea to practice that. Drop, cover, and hold on. So this is something that I would integrate the PT and OT to this, because you're going to be actually getting under the hard furniture like a desk, right? But for individuals that are using wheelchairs and walkers, you would be facing a wall or a corner and locking the brakes on your wheelchairs and walker and covering yourself, holding onto the furniture and your head from any debris falling down, okay? And if you're in the hallway when it happens, finding an interior wall is critical, and just bending down and covering yourself at that point in time. Normally, you actually count to 60. That's the average time frame they last. And you count to 60 again in case of aftershocks or tremors. This would be a great math exercise for younger students to learn and do, okay? And don't evacuate unless advised, because you just never know if there's going to be a fair amount of damage to the grounds of the school. And it would not be safe to leave unless otherwise. And I would actually invite your consultants to this as well, alongside the PT and OT, to get the kids to understand how to do this. Later on, I have a link to Shakeout BC that actually does annual drills in October. And you can go on there, and individuals, schools, etc., can apply to participate. And they send you emails with suggestions and stuff like that. I am a BC Earthquake Alliance member, so if anybody has questions, they can send it to me if they wish. Next slide. Sip up to my drink here. Perfect. All right. So all that information you learned in school, it can be duplicated at home. So parents should be involved, siblings should be involved. And this is all a whole learning approach for everybody, okay? So the maps that the student made in school, they can do one for home as well. Indoors and out there, where is your emergency exit at home? Where's your fire extinguisher if you have one? The alarm panel if you have one, and where's your fire alarm that goes off in your building or house? And build a go kit similarly to the one at school. However, there will be additional information that's needed in the go kit, especially if you end up needing to shelter in place. Okay. So that's a separate issue, but since you're at home, but there's additional things that you have to add into your kit for sheltering in place, or needing to head to a reception center if you're required to evacuate. And there's also the car kit as well. So there's a bunch of other kits that a lot of people don't anticipate needing to add. And that's a completely separate session that I can discuss with other folks after this meeting. So finding all the hazards and risks, especially with earthquakes, because what happens is, I've done this myself with my own stuff in my apartment, is making sure all your pictures are tacked to the wall really well. But in my building, since we have sheetrock, you can't use nails, so we have these special things so that we can put pictures up on the wall. All of my books, heavy ones, are on the bottom shelf, and I have stuffed stuff at the top so that if the earthquake happens, then it won't be as much damage to my items or myself, but I would be under the desk with my guide dog Parmesan. So that it's just something that you could add to your science and social studies literacy project. Practicing your drop cover and hold on is an annual thing, and I actually put the date on the slide, but I will, like I mentioned earlier, make sure it's included in the resource guide that Alana will be distributing after the presentation. And here's another last suggestion that I would like to leave with you, with the group. Book time with the fire hall one-on-one with your students. Because a lot of times when you have a class field trip, there's not always ample time for the student to really feel the fireman's gear, hoses, fire truck, everything. It just helps them understand. And even feeling the hose going onto a fire hydrant, how does that work? And it's because even when I was younger, I wouldn't have known any of this. We never had a field trip to the fire hall. A lot of this stuff I learned afterwards, and I'm a sponge for learning. So I do a lot of the stuff. I find learning is great outside the classroom and realize exposure to things. So that's something that can be integrated into the IEP, to have a one-on-one field trip for the student to go to the fire hall. And I should mention, with my literacy, my print literacy, for those curious, one of the other things that I was remiss to mention, I used to be in judo, and when I was a child, through my intervener's husband, and since there was a long travel back and forth between house and the dojo, I spent a lot of time reading to my father in the car. That was, for those that are not car sick, this is great. But I did this a lot. Even when I was reading Braille, I read to death. And it helps your reading speed if you learn to read in the car when you're traveling back and forth. So I love doing it, and Dad loved it too. Mom didn't like it because she found it too distracting for her driving. So that you have to kind of consider the person's ability to concentrate. So it's his own version of a book on tape for my dad, with me reading to him. Okay, the next slide, please. So with this slide, Alana's going to take some time to share some information with you, and then we'll conclude it and we'll open the floor for any questions and stuff like that. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you, Jen. This is Alana speaking. So Jen has provided us with a lot of valuable information and strategies for teams supporting students with deafblindness around emergency preparedness. We thought it would be helpful for our audience to tie Jen's presentation to the importance of literacy and using literacy instruction to reinforce the understanding of emergency preparedness. So as Jen talked about, literacy skills have a direct effect on a person's quality of life and play a critical role in the framework and function of society. Jen, she just shared a great story about, reading in the car and how important it has been for her to be able to read in her quality of life. So it is something that is crucial for all people because it increases the opportunities for learning, employment, social interactions, and overall well-being. For some of our students, it's also important that we move away from literacy as only reading and writing and think of it as communication. When we consider literacy as communication, we realize that there are many ways that we can engage with one another. Ideas and experiences can be shared. We can share and exchange information through dialogue. And it's really important to tailor communication to each individual, much like Jen talked about having a total communication approach where her intervener used all the ways that worked for her to develop her literacy and communication skills. So we have a few literacy instruction ideas to support learning about emergency preparedness for our students. And the first is experience books. Experience books are tools created by or with a student to support communication about an event or topic that is meaningful to them. So they come in many forms and are personalized to be accessible to the individual student, considering their vision, hearing, mobility, conceptual understanding, and preferences. Experience books can be personalized, and we know that personalizing literacy has a positive effect on learning. When you make an experience book about emergency preparedness, use the student's name and their routine around the emergency plan, procedure, or protocol in the experience book itself. Create the book together because that facilitates familiarization with the routine or expectation and also memory about it. It is an opportunity to discuss the experience and build understanding. An experience book can also help students with emotional support because they can anticipate what's going to happen and what they will be doing. And in times of emergency, things might seem a bit chaotic, but if your student can anticipate what's going to happen, that will lower their anxiety. And lastly, read the book together. Some finer points to remember about experience books is to use materials that match the experience and conceptual understanding for the student, and to use communication modes that match the student's abilities. So you might use photos, line drawings, objects, print, Braille, ASL, and labels. And so the next one is calendar schedules or calendar systems. While we can't schedule an emergency, it's still important to have an emergency queue for your student. And Jen talked about this earlier. So this might be an object queue, a line drawing queue, a picture queue, a sign queue, a tactile queue, or maybe even a verbal queue. If it is a tangible queue, the intervener should always have that queue with them so they can let the student know that everyone is pivoting to something different right now. Next is routine and rehearse. And Jen, you talked a lot about this, and we can't underscore it enough, right? Check your school's emergency guidelines and protocols for specific details about the procedures for various emergencies. Periodically, you can practice the emergency routine by going through the steps. Use your experience book that you created with your student and follow the instructions in the book. Routines can be an opportunity for your student to demonstrate comprehension and ask questions for clarification. We know that when students have predictability, their anxiety goes down and learning increases. And lastly, remember, this is a new area for learning, so it's an opportunity to develop new vocabulary as you teach your student new words in print, Braille, ASL, picture cues, symbols, object cues, whatever meets their communication needs. So I'm going to pass this back to Jen.
Thank you very much, Alana. So I'm just going to reiterate a couple of points that we discussed today. And I'm sure many of you, your head's probably exploding a little bit, like have lots of ideas. And I would love to hear your ideas, suggestions, or questions, even during the Q&A, or even when you email me. I have contact information listed later. And I will be having a feedback questionnaire that Alana will be distributing for our participants to review. And since this is recorded, you can go back and review it over again as well, so that you can review the information and we have further retention of what I shared today. So the key points is to mitigate those hazards that according to the student's needs, and broaden that to the family and school as well, because the student's risk and hazards, it's going to differ for everybody. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Collaborate with the whole team. It's a whole learning approach, O&M, literacy, all together, and everything can be integrated into the school curriculum as well. Pardon me. for both the fire and earthquake drills, it's going to take time and patience until your students build confidence in learning the skills that they need for the future. And I can't say this enough. It needs to be integrated in O&M more. From what I can understand, is there's not enough of it, especially since disasters and emergencies are becoming more constant. So we need to integrate emergency preparedness skills into the O&M and literacy skills for everybody, not just the deafblind, but the blind and blind and visually impaired, deaf and hard of hearing communities. So communicate to the teacher how the student's going to communicate the process those drills, and from your primary and secondary locations, multiple ways. Okay. Same thing for your earthquake. Make sure it's age appropriate for your student to learn these skills. There are 3 steps. It's very easy to learn, and you can use that with your object cues, braille, literacy, drop, cover, and hold on. We use an ASL, so there's all kinds of different ways you can teach it to your students. And lastly, the homework. Students can teach their parents what they learn if they're able to. And all of this is highly interactive. So building maps, building assessments, actually going for a walkabout to find those hazards, everything. It's just very interactive. And here's an example that I never thought of, but most places it's not an issue anymore. Changing your batteries in your fire alarms, because you have to check that periodically. Most of the time they suggest it during daylight savings, and you replace your actual alarm every 6 years. So it's something 6 to 10 years, something like that. But that's something that doesn't fall on me because I live in an apartment building. They conduct annual fire alarm testing, and within our unit, my unit is actually both audible and visual alarm. So it flashes, but it has a good sound to alert if there's an issue. And on a monthly basis, because it's for insurance purposes, the fire alarm is tested on a monthly basis, just the hallways. So knowing those ahead of time can be beneficial. So that's another example, having the kids tested, get them to hear what the fire alarm at their home sounds like, or feel like if the child can't hear it all. If there are a lot of devices out there that can be used tactilely as well. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned, Alana's going to send you a one-pager that I created with some interesting information that may benefit you, a teacher's guide. They take out BC. And there's one item that is on there is you can actually sign up before you get evacuated, and make sure your names are listed and you're ready to go instead of having to wait to get the evacuation order and you're sitting at a reception center and you're signing up to get the information. You can now, this just started last summer through EMCR. You can actually sign up ahead of time so that eliminates the time that you need to worry about later on. The evaluation survey that will be distributed, the deadline is listed as Thursday, February 9th. And Norman Lady A. And there will be a recording link available that Alana will provide at a later time. And at this time, I open the floor for any questions, and if Megan finds out if there's any questions in the chat box as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.
Next slide, please.
Were you ready for questions, Jen?
Yeah, I am. Fire away.
Okay. So somebody, their name's not on it's an iPad, just says, it says, I'm curious if you had intervener services in college. Maybe what kinds of supports?
Good question.
available?
I actually did not have intervener services, and luckily the program that I was working in, a lot of the work was individual, and it was all computer related tasks. That was, I was much higher functioning in the computer literacy knowledge in the class, so I was able to handle things on my own. There were very few issues except for my bookkeeping class. I did hire a tutor to assist with that, but otherwise, for 3 years that I was part-time student, I did everything on my own. There were some major roadblocks, but I got through it. And I tell you, there were some attitudinal barriers that my instructors had, and she thought I would never graduate in the program. Well, I graduated from the program.
Those attitudinal barriers are sometimes the hardest ones.
Very.
So we have a couple people just saying thank you. We'll share all of the comments with you after this, Jen. Sue Patterson says thank you for your extremely important information, and she agrees this should be included in O&M. Teresa says, I love the idea to include this with literacy, making an experience book that can be read and reread and shared.
And if anybody ever wants to share their experience books, because I love having things in my toolbox, you're more than welcome. My contact details is on the screen, but the physical links will be on the resource list. If any other ideas you want to fire my direction, I'm all available to share your thoughts, because the more information I gather, the more information I can share with others later on.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, if people want to share the experience books or other things that they make. Yeah, everyone at PopTP would be keen to see that as well. Another thank you. Christy says, thank you, Jen. My student actually had a situation when the fire alarm went off and she was home alone. She was not prepared and it was a very scary situation. I will take this information back to her.
And if they want further suggestions, you're more than welcome to pass along my email address and I can walk them through it for any back and forth to work through it.
Awesome. Yep, no, thank you. Linda Mamer says this is amazing, clear and easy to follow. Oh, that's great. If anyone else has any questions that you want to add in the chat, or if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, you're welcome to do that as well. But I think that's all we have for now. As Jen said, our information is on the screen here, so people can contact Jen with other questions if you think of them later.
So
because you know, after you walk away, you're like, oh shoot, I should ask this question, you know. And sometimes you have ideas that pop in the middle of the night in your sleep. So exactly. Don't hesitate to email me at any time.
Thank you, Jen. That's really nice of you to do that. I'm sure there's a lot of people that will have questions afterwards and will want some ideas or guidance in this area from you. I just want to say thank you for presenting on literacy and emergency preparedness and mitigation strategies. You know, if you think back to the beginning, I really appreciate your comments where you talk about the importance of a deafblind intervener and how that was so helpful with you at school, as well as the total communication approach, where the intervener uses a combination of communication methods that worked for you. I think you are a rare bird for many reasons, and you're such a great person, and you've got such a unique perspective on emergency preparedness that I think is really helpful for everybody here. You really had a very unique path to get to where you are here today. You talked about how literacy is essential and how it's been such a key for you in life. And we want to make sure that all of our students also have those opportunities as well when they finish school and go into adulthood. You guys shared a lot of ideas with us that we can do in schools around emergency planning, preparedness with our students, and how it overlaps in many different subjects, from science and social studies, math, language. You talked about critical thinking and problem solving. The O&M instructor is such a really important person on the students' team as well, because they can help with mapping and navigation, how to plan your routes for getting outside. I like your ideas for tactile learning. Like, let's go to the fire hall. Let's go find the fire hydrant. Let's check them out. Let's find the fire alarms. Let's build some concepts around this. So it's something that's not scary, and it's something that kids can have some understanding about, and not be so stressed when these events happen, right? So thank you for that. And
Is it possible for me to ask a question?
sure.
We have a student who's in grade 1, and we're trying to get the parents to understand the value of having a deafblind intervener outside of school that could take her into the community, and then during holidays work with her, just continue to expand her world. And I think it might be a bit of a translation barrier for them to understand it. And we're just wondering if you have any advice or anything that you can say that could help me, that I could translate to them to explain like the value that an intervener has.
Jen, do you want to?
Well, I think this is, I was going to say that when there's language barriers, yes, that can, and also cultural barriers. So, and a lot of those are going to be difficult to break down because different countries have different attitudes about people with disabilities. So one of the key suggestions is, besides reaching out to Teresa's team, the name escapes me at the moment, Teresa Hancock, they provide summer intervener and spring break and summer programs. I actually had that experience, the summer intervener program, and it's so essential to keep those skills up even when you're not in school. And this one thing that really helped me growing up is I had an excellent role model, and she was the person who I saw. She was employed and she went to school, very similar type of deafblindness as I was. So I think connecting with someone, doing like a pen pal thing, depending on the student's capabilities. But the parents really need to talk to another deafblind person so they can see that they can independently handle things. Grade 1 is still a bit young, but if you start connecting now, I think that will be really beneficial, because for some parents, when it comes to the transition stage from high school to the next steps, it's going to be challenging to let go or find other resources so that they can build on it. Okay, but language barriers and cultural barriers. My last suggestion is research where they originally from and find out what some of those barriers could be, and then find ways from to reduce that issue, if that makes sense. And you've got the consultants for your help too, so keep them in mind.
Yes, and also we just put in the chat here, and Teresa's also given her information for the Canadian Deafblind Association, CDBA BC, and just give her an email, and she can maybe or even pass their information on to the family so that they can reach out to her with questions as well. Does that help, Tasha?
Yeah, I just put a note in the chat. She's on our team. So
Excellent.
yeah, we're just slowly kind of working
Perfect.
our way through barriers, but we're making progress in meetings with parents. So that's good.
Nice. Good. Yeah, so anyways, Jen, you also, I just wanted a couple of things that I wrote down in my notes was the importance of a go bag. And I think that would make an excellent experience book. It could be what's in my go bag, right? Lots of rehearsing, and importance of including families in emergency planning at school, but also encouraging them to do that at home. There's lots families can do, from making kits, maps, and making plans. Drop, cover, and roll on October. Oh, I didn't write the date down. What was it again?
Drop, cover, hold on.
Drop, cover, hold on. I did write that down correct. Sorry. And that's on
Drop,
October.
cover, and roll is for when you on fire. That's a separate one.
Right. Drop, cover, and hold on. And that will be on October 25th at 10:16. Okay, good. And yes, and collaborate with your schools. So that's, yeah, that was great. Thank you.